Department of Transportation, there's a whole group of them. They will identify peer MPOs that are similar to us if possible as far as size, budget, scope, and region that are good at public for approval. If we do, we're thinking to coincide that with the meeting of this group. So they would want to talk to our stakeholders, and see how we interact with them. So that if that does happen, it probably won't be till June or July. So we're kind of excited about that, and we will keep you posted.
Okay. Moving on to staff presentations, transportation improvement program. I see Charles is not here, but it's like Scott's going to take the floor.
Well,
maybe not. No.
Scott will be discussing environmental
Okay,
justice.
we'll move on to that.
Point of order, I would actually be moving to item 4.2. I'm not prepared to discuss 4.1. Let's see. So, environmental justice is something that NERC has really tried to take seriously, and it is a requirement for the Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administration requirements for long-range plans, such as our 2050 plan, to demonstrate an environmental justice analysis of the plan. So this presentation is just going to quickly give you a high-level overview of what to expect that to look like for our 2050 plan when it officially launches from public comment beginning April 1st for a 30-day comment period. So first of all, some background about environmental justice. First of all, we're starting from a strong foundation. We actually received a commendation in our planning certification review in 2013 for our environmental justice analysis for what's now the former 2040 plan from FHWA and FTA. So we wanted to build upon that. But we wanted at NERC to incorporate more layers into this analysis than simply poverty and percent minorities, which were the two indicators of environmental justice areas back then. And we wanted to expand accessibility beyond simply accessibility to retail centers, colleges and universities, libraries, and hospitals, to include accessibility to, for example, fresh food locations and healthcare clinics more generally than just hospitals. And so we reviewed some case studies and put together a best practice framework that takes into account 7 demographic stressors instead of just those 2, poverty and percent minorities, that contribute to an area being classified as an environmental justice area. So we looked at this whole environmental justice process is really a 4-pronged process. Number 1, we identify environmental justice areas, which we've already done. Number 2, we award projects that address the environmental justice areas through our notice of funding availability, which go into our transportation improvement program as projects. We've already done that, at least this first round with the NOFA. Number 3, we looked at an accessibility analysis. And number 4, our communication and outreach strategy. So we're working on numbers 3 and 4 right now. Number 3 will be out for part of the 2050 plan when we put it out for comment on April 1st. And of course, that'll launch into the communications and outreach step 4. So here are the 7 demographic stressors that I mentioned that the environmental justice analysis is based on. It's based on census block groups classified based on disability status, limited English status, low income, minority, no vehicle access, senior, and veteran. And how we classified block groups in the census into environmental justice areas is if they were above the average for the region in 6 or more out of these 7 criteria, then they were classified as a significant environmental justice area. If they were concentrated in 4 or 5 of these demographic stressors, then they were considered a moderate environmental justice area. So either a significant or a moderate environmental justice area are considered quote-unquote environmental justice areas for the purposes of the analyses that we do. So just briefly, I'm going to show you a map of what those look like. So here's each of these 7 break down. Disability concentrated areas you can see are in purple on this map. Limited English concentrated areas are in yellow on this map. Low income concentrated areas are red on this map. Minority concentrated areas are gold on this map. No vehicle access are kind of this pinkish color on this map. Senior concentrated areas are yellow on this map. And veteran concentrated areas are this light goldenrod on this map. So when we put it all together, here are the environmental justice areas for the purposes of our analyses. The moderate areas are in the lighter purple, and the significant areas are in the darker purple. These are the areas that go into our analyses. Okay, so step 2, once we've identified the environmental justice areas, is we award projects that address environmental justice. So you might remember back when we were going through the whole NOFA process and scoring, we came to one of the 9 criteria for awarding points in our NOFA scoring was social equity. So across all types of projects, we awarded projects based on their benefits in the area of social equity, and key among the social equity scoring was environmental justice across all application types. So we really took that seriously. Step 3, for the accessibility analysis, we wanted to look at access to fresh food locations, permanent locations, not just farmers markets that appear seasonally, hospitals, emergency room locations, and low-cost sliding scale health clinics. So health clinics that are open, that accept Medicaid, Medicare, and offer a sliding scale fee. Libraries, higher education institutions, major employment centers, major retail centers, senior disability and veteran assistance agencies, polling places, and Bureau of Motor Vehicle branch locations. So we wanted to look at accessibility to all these in our EJ areas. And we wanted to look specifically accessibility by fixed route transit, demand response, or paratransit only, but not fixed route transit, or areas that are not even accessible by transit at all. So we looked at those kind of layers of accessibility. And so here's how it breaks down. So fresh food locations, only about 42.7% of these are in EJ areas, and about 41% are accessible by fixed route transit. 54% are only accessible by demand response transit or paratransit, and 4% of fresh food locations are not accessible by transit. If you look at hospitals, ER locations, and low-cost clinics, we see that, well, 9 out of 16 hospitals, or 56% of hospitals in ER locations are in EJ areas, and about 60.5% of low-cost health clinics are in EJ areas. When we look at how those are accessible by transit, only 37.5% of hospitals and ER locations are accessible by fixed route transit, and 52, so a little bit better percentage of the low-cost healthcare clinics are accessible by fixed route transit. We look at demand response transit accessibility. Well, all of the remaining hospitals, or 62.5%, are accessible by demand response only, but not fixed route transit, and 47% of the rest of the low-cost care clinics are accessible by demand response transit. We look at libraries. 40% of the libraries are in EJ areas. We look at 32% of libraries are accessible by fixed route transit. 53% of libraries are only accessible by demand response transit, not fixed route transit, and 13% of libraries have no transit access. Higher education institutions, I have a pretty good number. 77% are actually in EJ areas. 88% are accessible by fixed route transit. Only one higher education institution is only accessible by fixed route transit, and that's Calumet College of St. Joseph in Whiting, because there's no fixed route transit in that part of North Township. Major employment center locations, all of them are actually in EJ areas, so 12 of 12. 75% are accessible by fixed route transit, and the remaining 25% are only accessible by demand response transit, which means that none of the major employment centers aren't accessible at all by transit. When we look at major retail areas, about pretty good percentage, well, 36.8% are in EJ areas, so there's more room for improvement there. 47% of those major retail centers are accessible by fixed route transit, and the remaining 52% of major retail centers are only accessible by demand response transit. We look at senior disability and veteran care facility locations. 40% are in EJ areas. About 25% are only accessible by fixed route transit. 71% are accessible only by demand response, but not fixed route transit. And only 3% are not accessible by transit at all. And then when we look at polling place locations, about 39% of them are in EJ areas. About 21% of these polling places are only accessible by fixed route transit, and 76% of polling places are only accessible by demand response transit, but not fixed route transit. That's a big discrepancy between polling places that are accessible by, buses that run all the time versus you have to arrange paratransit or demand response to get to them. And only 2% of polling places have no transit access. We look at Bureau of Motor Vehicle branch locations. Only 25% of them are in EJ areas. Only 25% of them can be reached by fixed route transit. 75% of them can only be reached by demand response transit, but not fixed route transit. So we look at all this accessibility, and this is what's going to go into our analysis. We're looking at accessibility against environmental justice. I'd be happy to take any questions if you have them. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Scott. Does anyone have any questions for Scott?
Yeah.
So they were out of here. Will this be available on the website?
So it's all going to be available as part of the 2050 plan when it launches on April 1st. We will make sure that we get the word out for all of
Copy of that beforehand, please. Review.
I can get you a copy of
Especially for us in terms of looking at the polling places, and that's very concerning.
I was wondering, I think some of the polling locations might be missing in LaPorte County. There were some missing dots, like I know LaCrosse, for example, has a polling location, but I didn't see a dot on there.
Okay.
So,
Well, this is good feedback. Again, we have time to work through some of these kinks before people first.
We can, possibly send the committee to send us.
Yes.
When you say that area is accessible, you know, it's an area that's accessible, but, you know, I know from kind of experiencing people that I know in wheelchairs that, like, an area can be accessible, but yet, like, the entire route and the entire process has to be accessible. Is there any drill down on that experience?
As far as how we looked at accessibility, we looked at best practices in the planning profession for how you consider, like, for example, fixed route transit accessible. So we looked at quarter mile around each stop location for bus stops, and it was a half mile around commuter rail stops, like NICD. Because that's best practices. You look at only quarter mile out from bus stops and half a mile out from commuter rail stops. So it really was pretty simplistic in terms of what we had available to us from the data. You're right, there definitely could be some, even if it's theoretically accessible, there could be other obstacles that one would confront to actually being able to get from door to door. We couldn't necessarily come up with a good methodology in that sense, I guess.
But so I guess follow-up question is, with the scoring criteria, maybe I couldn't catch it all in time, but so projects that would speak to filling in those gaps, basically, to make specific routes more accessible? Was that part of the idea?
I mean, well, first of all, when we look at our NOFA process, the Notice of Funding Availability for the project that we score, like I said, that was step 2. We did take into account, for example, on some of the transit applications, we drilled down a little deeper into accessibility. This is more of the environmental justice analysis is more of a high-level accessibility analysis, so maybe in this area we did drill down.
So this is a kind of a drill down or follow tool Kathy asked. I think so it's good data to have to start with, but then in certain areas where we notice that there is very limited accessibility, will this data be used to develop a plan to increase accessibility?
That's a good point. I mean, I think the gist of, we would like to see this data go toward projects that tangibly improve accessibility. I think that at least, because that's how the planning regulations work, is that this is a long-range plan that guides the efforts for projects that can be developed in implementation practices later. Right now we're at the stage of developing a long-range plan, but I do think that we would expect a segue into developing a project.
I would add, so a couple of the tools that we have, we put the funding out there, and we put points associated with these different emphasis areas that are important through the 2050 plan. And then it's up to the transit operators or the local governments to apply for projects and prioritize those projects. That's one of the tools. But planning is another tool. Inventory is another tool. We actually have a project plan to do an inventory of all the fixed route bus stops in the region with an eye to, I think universal access, accessibility type of approaches, so that by the time we put money on the table next time, we'll have an inventory, we'll have more information to help those jurisdictions guide their decisions.
So you could essentially give increased points or preference to transit operators who are filling some of the gaps that have been identified.
Do we take any steps to communicate this data about where there maybe are gaps in transit and environmental justice areas? Do we make an effort to communicate this with those cities or municipalities or governments that would be responsible for solving that problem?
I think NERC always provides a forum to elected officials from these communities to, we provide information and they have this information available to them. And these structures like this committee are enable perhaps elected officials from those communities and others, local advocates, to help come up with solutions. At this point, I think we're still working on a strategy maybe that would target. We do have a bunch of strategies that we built also, which if you were at TPC yesterday, Iman presented a high level event. And so that'll be part of our plan as well. Is that there'll be lists of strategies to how we can address some of these issues.
And the strategies are on our website for public comment.
Yeah, those have been.
Great.
The public comment period for the strategies ended on February 22nd.
But they're still there to look at.
But they're still there to view.
Any other questions for Scott? Thank you. Yep. We'll move back to 4.1 on the agenda, which is Transportation Improvement Program. That's Charles Bradsky.
Taking someone's out. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Scott, for jumping in front of me. I was in another meeting, and I apologize. So there's many challenges to our transportation system today. Properly maintaining bridges, roadways, improve congestion, pollution, as well as safety. Protecting the environment and reducing the project delivery timelines are also some of the basic requirements for our transportation infrastructure. In addition, everyone wants to live in a place that is safe, connected, renewed, and vibrant and united. So how do we in America choose these projects with the greatest impact on our desires with our actual needs? What I have shown here, or what I'll show here is how we do this and what the Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP as we call it, is. Oh, thank you. So we are, NERC is a metropolitan planning organization, and it is the policy board that is created and designed to carry out the metropolitan planning, transportation planning process. Metropolitan MPOs are required to represent localities in all urban areas with populations over 50,000 people, as determined by the latest U.S. Census. MPOs are designated by agreement between the governor and the local governments that together represent 75% of the affected population, including the largest incorporated city. NERC's purpose is to institute and maintain a comprehensive planning and programming process for transportation, economic development, and environmental policy. MPOs are required or responsible for cooperating with all levels of the governments. So cities, towns, counties, in our case we have townships too. We also comprehensively consider many planning factors and are continuously evaluating the planning process for transportation planning. in these urbanized areas. So before I go into what is the TIP, I'd like to tell you about a couple different federal programs. One was in 2012, Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century. That was MAP 21. That was the federal funding in 2012 for transportation surface transportation projects. Fixing America's Surface Transportation, FAST Act in 2015, continued that and continue what the MAP 21 had started, but it expires in 2021. Inside these acts are the Federal Transportation Funding Bill. Both acts focused on safety and performance planning. So the FAST Act built on MAP 21, as I mentioned, and refined many of the highway, transit, and non-motorized, that is, bike and pedestrian funds that go into the Transportation Improvement Program in compliance with federal regulations and consistent with the air quality conformity and the long-range plans for the region. So the funding available for programs, the FAST Act also continues the metropolitan statewide planning process and maintain the use of these performance goals, measures, and targets, and identifying transportation projects needed and are selected. These goals include improving safety, maintaining infrastructure conditions, reducing traffic congestion, and improving the efficiency of the system and the freight movement, protecting the environment, and reducing delays in the project delivery. Planning is an important tool for the FAST Act, and it gives states and MPOs the direction they need to obtain these targets or goals. Another requirement of these federal programs is that all projects receiving federal funding and all projects that are regionally significant, regardless of the funding source, are included in the Transportation Program or TIP. In air quality or non-attainment maintenance areas, which Lake and Porter and some parts of LaPorte County are, air quality conformity findings by the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration in conjunction with the EPA. So what is the TIP? The TIP is a short-range financial and spending plan for the utilization of U.S. Department of Transportation Surface Transportation funds. These funds are used for roadways, transit, and non-motorized transportation plans. And they're used to implement projects identified in the Long-Range Transportation Plan, or 2050 plan. They're used to incorporate performance goals and to help the public stay informed about projects with federal aid and that are regionally significant. Some basic information about the TIP. The TIP is required to cover every 4 years by federal highway standards. However, INDOT has asked all the MPOs in Indiana to put out a 5-year TIP. So our next TIP now will cover 5 years, but federal highway is only concerned about approving 4 years. So the 5th year is kind of illustrative in the federal highways eyes, but INDOT likes to have that 5th year for planning purposes. So we are, along with all the other MPOs in Indiana, are putting out a 5-year TIP. And this year it covers from July of 2019, July 1st, and it will cover all the way to June 30th of 2024. It is, like I mentioned, it's updated every 2 years. We are currently operating under the FY18 to 2021 TIP. Our next one will be FY20 to 24, and the following one is 2022, so on and so forth. All interested parties are given an opportunity to comment on all parts all or part of the TIP or amendments before they're given to the commission for adoption. We do this with our public participation plan. We put it out on our website for public comment. The TIP includes information on all surface transportation projects that have federal funding attached and that are deemed significantly, regionally significant. Now, the toll road would be a group of projects or a program that would be in our TIP, even though it does not have any federal or state funding on it. The toll bridge that Terry is representing, the group that he represents, is a private funded bridge, but it's in our TIP because it's regionally significant, for instance. Each project must be consistent with the approved Metropolitan Transportation Plan. So what we're saying here is that we put out a long-range plan, our 2050 plan or our 2040 plan, and these are projects, these are areas that we have deemed are important. So of course, our short-range plan must conform to our long-range plan. It's part of doing what we say we would do. And it must be fiscally constrained annually. Now, this is something that NDOT has recently, and Federal Highway have recently enforcing. Up until 2 years ago, NDOT was okay having a 4-year TIP constraint for those 4 years, but now it's annually, which is really tough because at the end of the year, all our money has to be spent. If our money isn't spent, it goes back to NDOT, and if NDOT can't spend it, it goes back to the Federal Highway, and the Federal Highway will spend it somewhere else. So we, of course, want to show the Federal Highway and show NDOT that we are using all of the funds that they have given us to our communities. So projects are chosen for inclusion. How are they done? We have a NOFA, which is a Notice of Funding Availability, every 2 years. Right now we are winding up our current NOFA. Northwest Indiana receives funding from the Federal Highway and the Transit Administrations for funding surface transportation improvements in Lake, LaPorte, and Porter counties. Funding is available for programming is allocated to the Chicago or Michigan City urbanized areas. These funding sources come with eligibility requirements and may include how the funds may be used. In some cases, additional demonstration of eligibility will be required before approved for programming in the TIP. Programs that have highway safety improvement obviously must demonstrate that they are improving highway safety or safety in general. Programs that are applying for CMAQ, which is congestion mitigation and air quality, must show that they are improving congestion and air quality. The TIP also, under the federal regulations under MAP 21 and FAST Act, MPOs must establish targets and show progress toward these goals. These goals include safety, infrastructure condition, congestion reduction, system reliability, freight movement and economic viability, environmental sustainability, and reduced project delivery delays. And Scott spoke about the performance-based planning, programming and planning. How do we modify the TIP once it's in there? We do amendments and modifications. We have 4 different types of amendments. The first is a minor amendment, and that only requires a 7-day public comment period. Those are generally smaller changes to the project projects where we're only increasing funds by more than 50%, or we are doing a slight modification to the scope, or to the limits on the project. We also have major amendments. These are much bigger and they require 30 days. NDOT, or I should say NERC, chooses to offer all of our amendments a 30-day public comment period. We find it redundant to have some projects that are minor and some projects that are amendments, and putting out before the commission a minor amendment and a major amendment when we could just combine them. And if we combine them, then we just run them as one amendment. And truly, it would be up to us to decide what is major and minor. And it's kind of gray, so we chose to take the more conservative route and say we'll treat everything as a major amendment, because that way we're covering all of our bases. The MPOs also have emergency amendments. Now, emergency amendments are at the sole discretion of the executive director, Ty Warner, for NERC, in our case. And those are only exercised when there is immediate danger or funding lapse. We are very conservative about applying the emergency amendment. If a bridge were to get hit and the interstate need to be closed down and we need to work on it right away, that would be an example of an emergency amendment, where any amount of federal funding must be in our tip before the project can start. And if we need to take care of a bridge that got hit immediately, that's what it would be for. Like I said, we at NERC choose to be very cautious in exercising emergency amendment, because essentially we're putting the project in the tip and then doing the public comment period afterwards, which is somewhat backwards. And it's not good policy to do that on a routine basis. We also have administrative modifications, and those are minor changes, less than 50% of the funds for a phase of a project are added. We also, if there's minor scope or clerical errors that got into the tip that need to be corrected, and those are just done on an ad hoc basis. Usually they're done once a month. But all it requires is an email between myself and NDOT. So in the past, the tip we would publish a thick document of about 180 pages or more. It was a spreadsheet. It was very timeless and tiresome and cumbersome to find anything in there. But as of earlier this year, we have gone to an electronic tip, a web-based tip, and it can be found here at RTIP. We call it RTIP for region tip, because we are the region. And there's the web address. You can also get to it from the the NERC website. You can go back and forth between the two. And you can look up projects that are federally approved or that are on a certain amendment. You can do an advanced search if you want to look up any projects that are in a certain town or in a county. You can do that. You can also look at there's an interactive map which we are putting together right now. The RTIP is we had it in, and then it's on a new platform. So we are just putting all those projects on the map right now. I think there's about 5% of the projects, maybe 10% of the projects are mapped in the tip. So if I could have the luxury, I would program them all immediately and get all of them on the map, and I'm working on that as expeditiously as I can. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take those. This is my contact information. Feel free to give me a call. If there's any questions now, I'd be happy to take those. Yes?
Just a question, I mean, I'm curious to hear what you think the state of kind of the connectivity within the region is transportation-wise. I mean, I think about, just some of the struggles of getting, obviously the South Shore Line cuts through the region, but outside of that, I mean, are there thoughts about how to enhance kind of the ability to get around the region if you don't have a vehicle?
Using transit?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had those discussions, but really those are, we've got the transit operators, and we are working with those transit operators to bridge those gaps.
Yeah.
To if they have a service to get you one place to the other, and if you need to jump on another transit operator, then we are working with that.
Yeah.
But
is that part of like a strategic plan for the region? I mean, I'm just thinking about like if you work in Merrillville or you live in Merrillville and you work in Valparaiso or Hammond. I mean, it's hard to know other than, I mean, you can take the South Shore Line, but then you get out of Dunes Park.
But how do you get to the South Shore Line, for instance?
Right. How do you get to the South Shore
Right.
Line? How do you get off from the South Shore Line down to, it runs to the north part of these counties. How do you get?
And that is part of our long-range plan is to work on bridging these gaps between the different transit organizations.
Yeah.
So, yes, we are working on that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what I'm wondering is that a strategic priority for the planning process for the region, or is that sort of like, where does that fit into the? To me, that seems like that would be like an urgent priority to address the inability to get around this region without a vehicle. And I'm just wondering where that fits. Yeah.
Maybe I can speak to that a little bit, and that we had hoped, and we still are planning to do this, is do a regional transit study that hasn't been done and planned in many years. We haven't been able to secure the federal funding or the local match to do that. It would be a project we would have to hire consultants for, and it would be substantially beyond our normal annual funding allotment. So we haven't been able to put that together yet, but it is on our high priority to do this. Because yes, we are aware. But ultimately, then it would be up to the operators and the local officials to.
Right, to implement it.
Yeah.
I just didn't know
Yeah.
if it was being stated as like, we want to get this done,
And there is some connectivity between on-demand response and the fixed routes transit services. But again, it's some.
Yeah. I mean, I even think about it within counties, it's tough to get around. I mean, as the cost of living goes up in some municipalities across the region, and people are pushed outside of municipal boundaries, we've got obviously the V line in Valpo, but if you live in South Haven, how do you get? I mean, so it's not even
Part of our strategic plan is to focus on transit-oriented districts, development, so that we're not pushing people to our far reaches of our counties, because that only puts a strain on those roads and those on-demand response areas.
Right.
But to focus our energies on developing the brownfields and within our
That's why I think
areas.
NERC could take leadership in sort of casting a vision here, because I think internally, I mean, I can speak to Valparaiso, I know that a lot of the talk about affordable housing in our community is, well, we need to build out in the county, because we can't afford to develop affordable housing in the city but, you know, then you have this transportation issue. If you develop out of the county, well, then what? You know, but that's, I mean, I think that, you know, as I hear people talking about how to resolve that crisis, we have, you know, in Valpo, it's, well, let's build, you know, we gotta build out south of town, or we gotta build out west, but it doesn't, without some leadership at the top, I just worry that these kind of problems are going to be compounded as, so.
I wanted to
Yes.
ask you to speak to two things, maybe. First is make hopefully a short question, one of the reasons for that. On typical, for the TIP amendments that we put out for 30 days, typically, how many comments do we receive from the public?
We are probably at an average one comment. And some of the comments I've received there's a question whether or not they're just general comments that happen to come in during, or if they pertain to the TIP. Since they come in within that period, we do follow up on those and try to discern what the question really is getting towards. But if it is a major question and our TIP does need to be changed, we do change it. That is not something that, if someone does submit a question, we do answer them or reach out to them and figure out what their question is.
I just wanted to get the committee to see, because that's why we haven't made a case of why people should restart. And then, you know, my second question, and I know, is that Clark, right?
Yes.
Change it?
Yeah.
Do we have time to do a slight RTIP demo? Like I was hoping you could show people how they could look up by a jurisdiction or a transit operator looking for projects. I think that'd be the most common one people might want to look up. That's how I do it.
The RTIP is really great. It's really been a big bonus for getting out and seeing our projects that we have. So here's our website, and if you go to transportation and scroll down to Regional Transportation Improvement Program, RTIP, you will come here, and this is,
Normal people don't have to log in.
No, this
He just
is-
does. 'Cause he-
So the public could go there without having to log in?
Yes, yes.
yes,
It's just a, oh.
Yes.
Yeah, just put them-
Bypass that.
what's that?
You can bypass that screen, and I was like, I can't see it, but there's a link button there.
The private teacher that should have planned.
Oh, let's go back and, oh, wait a minute, yeah, maybe I could do that. This screen right here is brand new and is only a couple weeks old. So,
That is for local project sponsors to amend their projects or for Charleston stuff, but it should be a. Oh.
okay, here is the public site. And down here again, you can go back to the NERC website. We'll have to fix, I do need to fix that link because that link should bring you to this website that you're seeing on there. Here is all the projects that have federal funds or that are regionally significant. NDOT has of course, like this, as a show, you can see NDOT is required to have all their projects in our 3 counties in our TIP. LaPorte County, here's NICD's projects. Portage, Porter County, so on and so forth. The interactive map, as I mentioned, is really beneficial, and most people, and here it is, you can scroll in, scroll out, you can click on a project and find out about it. Well, this is what happens when you go on vacation and the new RTIP comes out. You should be able to click on any one of these. Click on any one of these and it will bring up information about this project.
I like to use the advanced search and then the project sponsor. That's how
But this is frozen for some reason. But normally you click on, say, Lake County, and it would pull up all the projects. It would give you an overview of how many projects are in Lake County, how many transit projects, how many bridge projects, how many bike and pedestrians, and how many road resurface projects. Here's what I was looking for. You can see although we have, in the current TIP, we have 10 projects totaling $8.9 million on bike and pedestrian projects. You see at the very bottom, we have 275 projects in the 18 to 2021 TIP, totaling $840 million and almost $841 million. And you can click on any county. You saw I just clicked on Porter County. I can click on Porter and LaPorte. As you see, or I could, again, take off Porter County and see that there's 104 different projects in LaPorte County. You can see I've got transit, there's $6.4 million in transit in LaPorte County. We have the advanced search here. You can look up DES numbers, designation numbers, which are project numbers. You can look up keywords for a project. You can look up what counties you want. And none of those counties are.
Because they're Indianapolis.
Yes. We have a call-in with our vendor on this one today. My apologies.
The cities are ours and the sponsors.
Yes.
Sponsors are ours.
You can look up all bridge projects or all transit projects, interchange projects. Again, what kind of federal funding? CMAQ, congestion mitigation, air quality, demonstration funds, those are funds given by the legislature. FTA funds, prior year balances, those are a special fund that NDOT has given us. State transportation block grant. Also, we have TAP, transportation alternatives. So those are some of the various funds. So if you want to look up what kind of funds are being used, HSIP projects, highway and safety improvement program, or if you want to look up what year these projects are. If you want to look up all the projects that are in letting right now, are going to be letting this year. So, Here's all of our amendments that we've put together this past year.
Okay, are there any other questions for Charles?
Charles, you indicated in the past, as the 2021 budget power presentation said 2020, so which date is it?
It ends in 2020.
2020?
Yes.
I just want to clarify, I noticed when you were drilling down the counties on the GIS map, there was a category for rail and a category for transit. Would the South Shore Line projects be in the rail or the transit? Or what is the rail?
They should be in the transit.
Okay. So rail would be projects related to
Railroad crossings.
crossings.
Yes. NDOT funds projects that are railroad and vehicular traffic crossings. They fund those in a special program. So that's where those would be in.
Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll move on to the regional broadband analysis by Peter.
All right, good morning. I have a very brief presentation here. So we wanted to take a look at internet accessibility within the region as far as our public outreach goes, to make sure we're reaching all the folks within the region with our various communication methods. So we took a look at a quick breakdown, and I think it's important to state here just from this slide, there is 20.75% of the region without internet access, and this was from census data, and in the report, these are all the households that reported they had no internet access. So that was not even cellular or any of those other types. So there's a large majority of people that don't have any internet access, and the majority is broadband, of course. And we do have some people that have cellular data only, so that's also important to take into note when we're pushing out information and data.
To clarify, this is what people have, not what's available to them, correct?
Right, this is what people have. Because we can look at the map and see, yeah, well, we can get these broadband lines mostly anywhere, but that doesn't matter if people can't afford it or don't have it. So just the quick overview, I got this data from table B28002. It was a 5-year estimate 2017 data. And what I did was I broke this down to zip code tabulation because I thought that would be more relevant than showing you data by census tract or block group, so we can put a code with an area and look at it more at the municipal level. A side note from that, the zip code tabulation actually aggregates zip codes through a methodology that the Census Bureau uses, because zip codes are actually distinguished by the routes, the truck or the mail delivery routes, and don't really form a nice chunk or plot of area. So they take care of that in their methodology. This is a brief overview of the breakdown of internet accessibility throughout the region, reported by the households. So I went and I pointed out the 5 zip codes that reported high amounts of no internet in their households, which all ended up being East Chicago, Gary, Shelby, and Wheeler. The majority of these were in Lake County as well. The highest being the Gary area with 50.5%, which I thought was a little surprising, interesting. Finally, it's important to overlay this with the EJ areas that Scott explained earlier as we go forward with our 2050 plan and future public outreach, to make sure we are getting feedback from all types of people from all over the region. And this, again, the EJ areas line up pretty well with areas that we're showing no internet accessibility. The higher zip codes, no internet accessibility. So, sake of time, that's my last slide as well. If there's any questions.
Question. Well, one, can I get a copy of this presentation? I think it'll be really useful. We're kicking off, LA County Complete Count Committee for the 2020 census. And, the Census Bureau is, focusing on a significant budget reduction, overall, and in the number of, door-to-door census workers, and have transitioned to, promoting online survey
Right.
responses. And, so this will be really important for us to, this doesn't have to change what they've done, but we need to really focus on these areas that have, significant, rates of no internet.
Yeah, because those census numbers are really important too. when
Right,
those
to
come
be able
out.
to get federal funding, to not lose legislative seats.
Right.
So we need to make sure that our communities respond, and, those hard to count communities will really be, be important for those ones that have high rates.
Mhm.
I just wanted to point out that the state of Indiana is making a big effort to increase broadband accessibility. The Next Level Community Connections project is actually, there's a grant process for communities to expand broadband, and I think $100 million is available, but that deadline is April 5th. So it probably applies more to rural communities because they don't even have access. Like your presentation was about households, but the big Indiana effort is about availability. And so I know that there's grants available, a lot of money into expanding broadband. So this is a very timely presentation.
One, would you consider sending this to the LaPorte County Commissioners? I know they're in the process of forming a committee to address broadband accessibility in LaPorte County. And then I'm also wondering, have you guys made any, looked into why some of these areas have a lot of households with internet connectivity, particularly with Westwell? I'm noticing 46391 on there is the standout in LaPorte County, and I'm kind of wondering why that is.
Yeah, so this is just the first look. I think you can, you can kind of make assumptions on why people wouldn't have, due to like demographic reasons or maybe even population age or whatever, but that would be kind of the next step to start looking at those maps and looking at the correlation. So.
Any other questions?
Can you go back a couple slides to the top 4? Okay, that one. So East Chicago, Gary, Shelby, Wheeler have no internet access, meaning that there's not people signed up for their internet, or they just don't have the ability to.
It's the households reported that they're not signed up for it.
There's not signed up.
Yeah. So there's more that goes into this than just like no accessibility. Could be more personal.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So I just thought that would be more of an appropriate context as it goes forward with us trying to reach out to people.
Correct.
Mhm.
Correct.
Okay, any other questions? No. Thank you, Peter. Moving on to the public participation plan.
Let's just meet Scott.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you're all doing very well. Some of these very invigorating and educational presentations that we had just discussed. And so now we're talking about public participation, so the whole reason that we are here, really. And so the reason I invited Scott and Peter and Charles to speak and to relay this information to the committee is because it's some of the things that really drive some of the processes that are here at the agency and why public participation ties into all of that and why it's so very important for the public to be involved in a lot of our planning processes around environmental justice, around our TIP, which is one of our core planning documents, and really how are people having the ability to access that information. So in regards to our public participation plan, so for some of you that were here at the last meeting, we're going to discuss the plan and dissect some of the language that was in the business plan that was presented last month. In this presentation, I would also love to gather feedback from the committee as we do kind of a brief high-level presentation in regards to the public participation plan. So in regards to public participation plans for NPOs, we have specific requirements that are set forth on the federal level, specifically within our federal regulation that is 23 CFR 450.316. That's a mouthful, right? So if you'd like to know more in regards to that federal regulation, it's located in the back of the business plan that was adopted last month, and there's copies out on the table outside where you gather your other meeting materials. And so if you want to read about that particular regulation in regards to public participation for NPOs, you can read all of that more in depth in the business plan. And so for the public participation plan, well, it includes all the ways in which NPO will always engage the public, such as documenting like the length of public comment periods, as Charles spoke about earlier, methods of outreach, and how the NPO will fulfill its federal requirements. In 2014, NERC's public participation plan went above and beyond the minimum for an actual public participation plan. And so it contained a lot of aspirational goals and objectives that were not always able to be achieved by the agency. And so due to this fact, our federal partners deemed the public participation plan to be out of compliance, and they advised us to revise the plan to the minimum requirements of 450.316. So we had our certification review. And so NPOs are required to self-certify that they meet all federal requirements. This is another federal regulation that comes out of another mouthful of numbers, 23 CFR 450.334. So this means, are we meeting our planning requirements, and are we following acts such as Title VI regulations? Are we following the Clean Air Act? Are we complying with the Americans with Disabilities Act? And so our federal partners, they conduct these reviews of the planning process for every MPO that contains a population of over 200,000 people or more every 4 years. Our population across this region currently is roughly about 755,000 people. And the certification review, that just assesses compliance with federal laws and regulations, and if we're offering opportunities for engagement and technical exchanges. So in 2017, following our certification review, we received a corrective action for public participation, and specifically with our 2014 public participation plan. Our federal partners required that NERC develop and submit a plan of action, that improved public participation within 60 days of relaying the report findings to our commission last summer in 2018. So we complied with this request within the 60-day time limit, and we are also offered additional technical assistance if required, if requested, excuse me. And so, which speaks to the transportation planning capacity building program that we spoke about a little bit earlier, and that we're currently working on. And so again, that program allows us to receive technical assistance in regards to our planning efforts with a peer MPO. And so we're very excited about that opportunity. And so we're advised by our federal partners that in order to remedy our corrective actions, we must update the public participation plan. So, we developed our 60-day plan of action, and so that involved improvement areas and actions. And so within those improvement areas and actions, we developed 9 improvement areas to improve with 15 actions. So currently, we as the outreach committee and as we're working towards updating the public participation plan, those are listed as the last 2 improvement areas with at least 3 actions of that 60-day action plan. And so if you would like to review the rest of the actions, they are listed on page 7 of the business plan. So as staff reviewed the 2014 public participation plan, our staff conducted this review as well as public participation plans of public participation plans from every NPO in the state. And so in our current plan, it consists of about 7 chapters and a total of 31 pages. And so on average, most NPOs in the state had an average of about 15 pages roughly. Now, while page length really isn't our top issue, it's really the content of those pages as to why our plan was considered too aspirational by our federal partners. So as we reviewed the content of the plan, we started to really assess where changes needed to be made, right, where we needed to begin making some updates and start mapping out the changes in the plan. So here's where we really would need your feedback. And so really after that truly invigorating presentation on public participation, right, we need your feedback. And so as our advisory committee on public participation, you are tasked with guiding the development of updating our public participation plan. And so on this slide, you will find several different topic areas and objectives that correspond with each topic. And so we would love for you to provide us feedback on each of these topic areas. Let's begin. So for the first topic area, who, right? So, well, who do we engage with during our planning processes? We have a clear objective here, a federal regulation to follow, and we briefly listed here stakeholders, the general public, as far as NERC goes, our commissioners and committee members, and as the outreach committee, how far should we extend the who category, and what are some of your thoughts?
For me, that was most critical, of course, involving the disability community, the leadership in the disability community, and key agencies, to be able to, from the start, to be at the table and be able to express how to access transportation, to clarity plan and be part of in every aspect. So, key organizations in every Fort Lake, LaPorte, and the region as a whole.
Anyone else? Thank you so much for your feedback, Ms. Albert. Yes.
To piggyback on what she said, agreed, with representation from the disability community, but yeah, geographically, I don't know where everybody's from. I don't think we said that necessarily when we were all introducing, but it seems like we're missing large swaths of geographic representation. So, and I know we're kind of light attendance today, so possibly when we're a full committee, it looks a little, more balanced.
Right. Anyone else?
The other one, I would like to see, especially this committee, youth representation. Keep the youth, the voice of youth, to prepare the next generation, because not all of us are going to be sitting at the table for too long.
And to piggyback on that, on the flip side, in our surveys, the #1 demographic that listed transportation as an issue was seniors. And so, making sure that we have the senior voice.
Yeah, can I ask a question? So I just want to ask, I feel like these questions are about this committee, not about the outreach. So we have invited all those folks. So it actually is the other question, the why question, right? If people aren't here, is it because, they don't know why we're relevant, we're not relevant? We've invited representatives of these groups. Right, so, kind of why we were gonna organize it this way, who we are and who wants to hear. We know who we think is relevant, but if they don't think, I don't know, maybe we should.
Please remind me, is this event being recorded right now?
Yes.
Okay, and so does everybody get a link to this recording that was invited?
They have access to it. They might not it might not be sent to them, but everyone has, I would hope everyone has access to it. So we usually put out.
That's actually a really solid suggestion.
There's a lot of noise out there. I mean, even the email that we get, we don't all read. But I think just, emailing the link to say, here's what you missed, and hello, wherever the camera is right now. You are relevant, you are needed. Like, please watch this, listen to it, share it with other people in your community that you're hearing, that weren't introduced at the beginning. I mean, I think just using the technology that we have to leverage it and to, straight up ask people.
Yeah, and if I'm being honest, like when I got the invitation, I wasn't sure, okay, is this committee just a check box on the federal plan that, we show up, NERC checks it off, and that's it? Or is there actually, a purpose behind, is there a value behind attending for the committee members? And so, maybe a little bit more of an explanation behind why, the outreach committee is there and why their feedback is important.
I missed the first meeting, and I did get the invite, but again, that is missing for me. Just the word outreach is great, because, okay, am I gonna be again the person put that one on the table to speak, so I'll be the rep for the disability community, is the other organization will be present, and what kind of, how we're gonna be received or approached, who's gonna be at the table, so those are kind of things that would be very helpful. The link, I did not, paper is fine, but sometimes it's better just even to put the earplugs while do something else and listen to the recording of what's going on or what's happening in the meeting, so that would be very helpful. Very busy people, with different sources, so to be multitasking at the same time to cover it all is a lot.
I'm curious, I know that obviously a big part of this is meeting just the federal guidelines for outreach. What are NERC's goals with this outreach? I mean, I know Kathy, directs the Valpo Next initiative now, and when they did that a number of years ago in Valpo, they were really intentional about getting a valid cross-section of the entire community, but that was a massive effort and really expensive to do that. And so, I don't know, it would be fantastic to do that, to have like boards up at the YMCA where people are providing comment and voting and making, but that seems like it's probably beyond the scope, is that right, of what you all are hoping to do here?
Well, first and foremost, we do have to accomplish the federal objective.
Right.
Is to get the plan in place, the public participation plan in place.
Right.
Beyond that, then we can address things that are more aspirational. So it's kind of like an order of priority. We have to meet federal guidelines, and then we have to go on to the next step. It's tricky though, I think, because there's a variety of, NERC is so broad, it covers so many different things. We can't be the conduit for every single comment about every single project. There are other people that they have to go through. By the time it's getting to us where they're asking for federal funds and there's a public comment, there should have already been a lot of public discussion prior to that we were never involved in. Municipalities are coming up with plans well before they sometimes come to NERC.
Right.
So this is just a part of a big piece.
I think as a staff, the staff leadership team, yes, we have to check the box. So that's the minimum we would hope to accomplish with this group. We still would like to do some of those aspirational things. We think that $800 million federal dollars out in the region should be relevant to more people than our response giving. So we think we could
That's how you get people here, put $800 million at the subject line. Right.
But it depends how we do, right? If we come out of this and we still haven't figured out the value add for everybody, we don't wanna waste people's time, because it is valuable.
So here's my, taking out my Valpo Next hat now and putting on my social media trainer and strategist hat on. There's things like watch parties now on Facebook, so like could you upload this video and have a, watch party? And just, we could tag the people that we think should be here or share, with people that we think should be here. And I know I would be happy to host a watch party if the video were posted and, kind of navigate it for the people that I influence. And if we each did that, I think we could go with the ripple effect and bring more people, into the conversation. And that said, I did miss the slide that said not all of us have, the internet connection, but those of us who do, I think, need to take responsibility and fill in those gaps. Not looking at NERC to do every single thing, but working with who we have in the room and leveraging it and getting the word out to get creative about how to bring it to the people that don't have, internet or can't watch this video.
Yeah, I'm just curious, even with these upcoming sessions, the one that we're gonna have at Valpo, but also the ones around the region, I wonder about, what would your all's pitch be if I'm gonna promote this event? Why should people come? What people are busy, they've got a lot going on in their lives. Why should they take an hour or two on a Wednesday evening to come to this session? I didn't even know how to answer that question so that I can effectively promote. But I don't know that I fully, I can give there's a lot of money involved in the region and this is an important process, but I think people will feel, unless I don't feel like I have the answer right now to that question that will get people there. So
Right.
what is the answer?
There has to be a pressing issue.
Right.
It has to be we're talking about, the South Shore double trip, the expansion of the South Shore, or it's not just general NERC engagement, right. I know that, but to get people engaged, there has to be something that they think, okay, this applies to me, it's relevant.
There was a comment from the audience, Ms. Hahn.
Dominique, I just from listening to your question and what we spoke about earlier, the stakeholders, the general public, and I heard at the table, the disability community and seniors, which I'm so glad to hear somebody else say that besides me. But with the disability community and the seniors, how are we going to get word out to him and out to those populations and get them here to these meetings to hear their voices? No decisions about us without us. We need to hear from them.
That's obvious because
Could you? Well, I'm just wondering, could you answer the question that I was asking about why should people come to this meeting? And then that might help us, with all these different communities,
So, I guess, it's behind your head.
So, so in regards, when we did our initial public engagement, when we developed the critical paths, we went out and we had about a dozen public meetings where we updated the language in regards to, we updated the language from the 2040 plan. And so after hearing a lot of different feedback across the region, we were able to develop what's behind me called our critical paths. Our critical paths are what is currently driving the development of the 2050 long-range plan. And so it speaks to 4 different planning areas and 4 different focus areas. And so within the critical paths, those are strategies to, that we are trying to aim towards. And this isn't, and so previously you may have heard that this is NERC's plan. This is not NERC's plan. This is the plan for the region to envision what our region will look like by the year 2050, and based off of the public's feedback developed those critical paths, and those critical paths are driving what are some of the strategies that we are trying to aim towards what our region will look like by the year 2050. And so the public can come to those open houses next month, as well as starting April 1st, and they can give us their feedback in regards to what has been developed for the plan so far. And then they can also come and have a more in-depth conversation with us one-on-one during the public open houses. And does anybody have a flyer? Can you hold it up? So there's about 3 dozen of these flyers that I printed for everybody to take a small stack, take it back to your office, let people know that these open houses are happening starting April 22nd to April 22nd, 23rd, 24th, and 25th. And so folks across the region will be able to come, have a conversation with us, learn more about the agency, and learn more about the 2050 plan, especially in regards to these critical paths. We'll also have subject matter experts from transportation to the environment to surface transportation to have one-on-one conversations with the public to better understand and kind of really dissect some of this information. And so really it's to educate, engage, and inspire our residents to understand the planning process and to continue to foster that relationship with our residents to move our planning processes forward.
And this plan drives development in
Yes.
the region.
And
And it
so
drives
we're-
federal dollars. It directs, it sort of like helps to guide federal dollars that come into the region for development purposes.
Right.
Currently, it mostly drives the transportation dollars,
Yeah.
but that can drive other dollars. Some of them have economic development dollars.
Is this on the website somewhere?
Yes, and I'll make sure that anybody who wants this information and wants to learn more about this, I will make sure to get any information. Just let me know, and I'll make sure to give you all the appropriate information that you need.
Suggestion, if you're printing more, that would be a great thing to print on the opposite side.
Oh, yeah.
Just because it's hard to get people to go from this to go to the website to know that that's what they want, but if it's like, here's what we're gonna be covering, on the first, or if you're gonna make any events, again, online, Facebook, Eventbrite, whatever, it would be really, really good to have that. Because I think that would get people there.
Exactly, that's the why, how do we get there from here?
If we can get an electronic copy, we can share.
We can email that out, ask people to post it.
So, I mean, that could be too, even if we may send it to the committee members who aren't here and letting them know that there will be these public meetings and ask them to share in their networks, because, as a government planning commission, you guys might not have the social media following that some of the community groups and organizations do.
I would say also the logo itself is not invited into our community. So if you just use the international symbol or something, then it's also inclusive.
Well, unfortunately,
So which part of the logo, the NWI 2050 or the little?
The little
icon?
markers here, so
The icon.
everybody's getting a single body.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry, was there any more feedback in regards to the presentation? Can we move to the next section? Was there any more questions though that anybody wanted covered? Anyone from the committee, anyone from the audience?
I want to clarify the feedback, is that okay? So I feel like that was a conversation about why, and that some of you are saying that information like the critical paths and the future vision are a why that might attract people. Thank you.
There were a bunch of how things, give it to us electronically, like the meeting link, the PDF of this. And then, I think Kelly, representing Legacy, right? Like you have interaction with a lot of nonprofits that would have inroads to a lot of the groups that we're talking about, right? So as long as we make sure that we have your, equal from the Unity Foundation, from the Porter County Community Foundation, it seems like they all in turn would have the same United Way as well. Would be a great one-place shopping. Rebecca, I think, Scott, you can probably talk with her right now. Yeah, so going to those places that influence, you know, many groups that would have representative voices, I think would be a great leverage, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then the transportation providers too, because I think, you know, as a community member and users, if I had a question with GPTC or with, you know, South Lake Connect Community in their transit or feedback, I would go directly to the provider. That would be my instinct. If I wanted expanded service or routes or different, I would go to that transit provider. And so, you know, being able to go through them to access the users.
I guess one major thing we overlook is just, you know, members of the press. Like, do we do traditional press releases at all? Okay. Good.
So we still do all of the traditional methods of communication. I think the only thing, and so that's press releases. Sometimes we'll have radio stations that will call us. We'll talk to the broadcasters. Of course, just generic direct email blasts, things like that. And so we're trying to not only continue to utilize those traditional methods of communication, but try to make sure that we are going or enhancing that to make sure that we are getting the word out. And so some of that is starting to implement on the ground strategies more often. For our 2050, we have been doing the pop-up events. For our coordinated transit plan, we were on the ground making sure that folks had meeting flyers, surveys, things like that. And so some of those strategies are starting to develop more. And so, and as we continue to do more robust analyses, especially what Scott and Peter had presented earlier, that is starting to really inform how we engage the public, where we engage the public, how our strategies are developed, how our content is developed, and things like that. Like Ms. Alvarado stated about making our meeting flyers more inclusive, right? So things that we didn't think about, we're just developing content, but those are really small details that really make a very big impact and things that we need to really focus on moving forward. For the next, so I think that we kind of talked a little bit about a lot of these things, not in a particular order, but I think that we covered who, we covered why, we covered how. We may not have covered what, and we may have covered where and when. So is there any additional feedback that may have been missed? Anything that needs to be clarified through any of the presentations, or any more questions that anybody might have?
Couple of comments. The request for alternative one there, could you make it stand out a little bit more? Because right now, like I'm looking at the bottom of the same print, so for someone who's visual impairments or someone's, they would automatically know that that's how it's there at the bottom. To be able to say, hey, I need to call this number for this email for alternative for the accommodations. So like a bold or like a print or some other things to run it all through. Yeah, it's helpful.
Anything else?
Ask our elected officials, do you think, if these things that your communities would push out in their communication networks, like?
I think it's gonna be challenging to get people, the general public, to get interested in this process. I think the 2050 plan is a really broad plan, and thinking about like La Crosse, for example, we have gone our entire existence as a municipality, and we're just now getting our first federal project. So anybody who had been, following NERC all this time had been following it and maybe contributing to it, but they probably didn't. The federal transportation dollars portion of it never really impacted their community. And there's certainly a lot of other places where they might be participating in the process, but they don't really get impacted by it, very frequently. I think that the key is probably to try and find, as many people who can represent other people to show up to this. Like, I'm not going to be able to drag my brother along to this thing. I mean, it's just not going to excite him. He has other things he likes to do. I would probably go to it, but I like this sort of thing, so it interests me. So finding people who are interested in this sort of thing and want to contribute is probably the first thing to focus on, and then try to rope in even more people beyond that. And to try and communicate the process also of like how this works.
But I think that's like, people are interested in transportation, and people care about transportation.
When it
It's
affects
an
them, absolutely,
issue.
yes.
Right, it affects them, and so it's an issue. I think it's just understanding why them coming to this meeting will have any benefits or relevance. Like, is it just you're gonna sit and listen to people talk, or will it be worth my time to come for, the public? And so that's where, cause I think it is something that there's the potential that people can come because they care about transportation, but it's packaging that why.
Yeah, and we're working against probably the general public being maybe not fully aware of the entire process of how this works. I mean, if you ask the general person, the average public, what an MPO is, they're probably not going to know. If you ask them even how their municipal government works, there could be some gaps in how the planning process works for transportation projects there as well.
Right,
So
this doesn't tell me anything at all. It's NERC invites you to participate in the NWI 2050 draft plan. There will be like nowhere in this is transportation mentioned, is bus, is, South Shore train mentioned. So like all the words that would get people interested are not in here.
So with that particular flyer that we really developed that to just be like our general kind of announcement, or not so much as announcement, but our general information to disseminate to the public, to let them know that a meeting is happening and things like that. But I totally hear what you're saying about making again and again to you and Miss Alvarado in regards to making these announcements more more inclusive and more kind of zhuzh them up a little bit, right? To make them kind of like excited, to get people excited about what we're doing here. And so that's actually been part of our on the ground strategies as well, especially at our pop-up meetings, right? One of our initial questions, hey, have you heard about Mercy? Then you give them that quick, it's like being a salesman, give them that quick elevator speech and hook them, and then we go into this, right? We go into, we're talking about the 2050 plan, we're talking about some of our planning process, we're talking about the tip, we're talking about all of these different things. And so in a way to do that, in the way that we have been doing that, is developing, again, more engaging content in order to really engage with the public in a way that, we have to realize that once we come out of here and we go onto the ground, we can't be out in the public doing all this planning jargon, right, and talking over people's heads. We have to make our content friendly in such a way that anybody and everybody has the ability to be able to give us appropriate feedback. And so, yes, Ms.
I think your point is good, that, this is more of a save the date.
Yeah.
Down here though, how it's got a little shortened link about, you can view the plan and offer comments that way. What I'd maybe love to see is a shortened link to go to the full description of the event, for full details about this event, where you can get that. And also another idea might be to just ask people to RSVP. And that way you kind of know that you've got people coming or not. And if you don't, then you can take that extra, effort to go out and post flyers in libraries or wherever people meet that you really want, to come. And then getting those emails collected, you've now got a way for people that have email in a way that you get it. You can involve them in the future, send them these meeting links, send them additional things that can be reviewed online. But I think like building a database of people who care about it, they're gonna give you a ripple effect and bring more people the next round and the next round.
Thank you. Yes.
Include the number for the deaf community as well.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Include the number for the deaf community as well.
Oh, right.
So I'm interested, I've observed, like, this is great feedback for this set of public meetings and events. And how are we gonna turn this into a plan going forward is the question for all of the.
I think we need to do this every time, you know, I mean, it's like this starts,
Yeah.
the first thing that we can do better, but we need to keep doing these things, and then I think as we do these things, we're gonna find more things, you know. But again, having a database of people is gonna allow us to get more feedback. I would survey the people, you know, that are coming, ask them, how did it go for you, ask them for feedback, and then it can go beyond, you know, who's in the room now. I feel like we're just here to plant the seeds and give feedback on this one thing, but be representative of everything we do.
But on top of that, I think the, you know, some of the feedback that we've given on this, and we can maybe apply that to future things we do, like you said, the number for the deaf, you know, just making that a checklist sort of thing like that needs to be on there, and then we just kind of do it routinely. And I think that this flyer is perfect for people like me or Richard or something who've totally been immersed in the nursing process where, you know, we don't need to know the why or what anything, we just need to know the dates, that's all that's relevant to us. We already know all the rest of the stuff. You know, but to the general public, I think Kelly's point is absolutely right. Why it's relevant is the key thing to have on there, then the dates, and then, you know, how else you can, you know, if you need additional accommodations and stuff like that.
And I think that you bring up an excellent point, right? And going back to where we have the section of who and like who was engaged, and that's our stakeholders and our general public and our nurse commissioners and committees, that this particular flyer, like that's just enough for them. They just need to know when and where. But for the general public who isn't engaged, who isn't really connected, who really isn't really involved in our planning processes, how do we basically sell them on this? Right? So those are also things to keep in mind, and feedback that would be greatly appreciated. And so yeah, and then in what format, right? So you're saying that even just looking at some of the general logos on the flyer, like man, we excluded some folks. It only is focusing on able-bodied individuals, but if we're trying to do appropriate outreach to the general public, and that general public involves persons with disabilities, well, how do we make sure that something as simple as this is presented in a format that means that that these events are inclusive, right? And then looking further into the flyer, you know, where and when. So where and when are these opportunities taking place? Like we, on the federal level, have general timelines and guidelines that we abide by, but are we making sure that these opportunities are taking places at good times? Is it a good geographic location to meet with the general public where they're at? Things like that. And then of course, why are these opportunities taking place? Well, we know we have federal guidelines or requirements to meet, but in regards to engaging the public, and that's all of the public, that's everyone. Well, why do you want to be involved in this? How do we sell you on this, right? How do we get you involved, and why should you participate? So those are, and then also going back to how. So how are these opportunities taking place? What methods are we utilizing? Is this flyer enough? Well, there's some issues on the flyer, right? So it's not inclusive, so some folks might feel excluded by simply looking at this flyer that's the same date, right? And then looking at maybe the times and the locations. Maybe that's not. Also, did we, as a staff, did we do a good job at making sure that we mapped out and set out all of these details for both times and locations and things like that for folks to be able to come and learn more and participate with us, right? So those are all very good things to keep in mind for us as a staff. Looking forward. Was there any other additional feedback that anyone wanted to include?
Okay, I think that wraps up this presentation.
Mr. Hardaway, I haven't heard from you.
No.
No? Okay. And what about you? I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
I'm Katie.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. I think and then the interactions I've had with the general public, I think something that's really important and has already been touched on is just really emphasizing that and you said how their input is incorporated process, like that their voice really matters, because so many times the feedback I've gotten is like, it doesn't matter if I show, or it doesn't, because I'm not part of an organization, or I'm not, you know, I'm not an official or in some capacity. So I think just understanding where they are and how their input is incorporated into all of this.
Okay. Anything else? Well, I guess that concludes my presentation. This is my contact information. Please reach out to me anytime.
Okay, well, that's pretty much the last thing on the agenda. The next outreach committee meeting will be held here on Wednesday, May 8th at 10 a.m. Same room. Are there any other comments, anything else that anyone wants to include?
This might be a little premature, but I wanted to let the group know about something that Valpo Next is hoping to offer, and we'd open it up to the region, not just Valparaiso. It's something called asset-based community development. I, along with 4 other people from Valpo, were able to attend a 2-day workshop in Chicago last summer. And it's really, I think, relates to what we're talking about here, because it speaks to communities are built on the gifts of people. So we can look at everything that's wrong with the region, and it can get pretty discouraging. But it gives us a methodology to tap who do we have in the community that is willing to come forward and, you know, be a volunteer or be an advocate or whatever, you know, whatever it is that we're trying to do. And it's just a really lovely methodology that helps empower, you know, communities to do more of what they want to do good for their community. So I'd love to share that. Details, you know, for registration when we have it. Just want to give you a little heads up it's coming.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming, and we're adjourned.